Okay, we're going to start Chilik Hey of the Kovetz. In this Chilik is two sichos that focus on why the Yimei Elul, why the days of Elul Yimei Achil, why the days of weekday, and how the Mashal of Melech Basodeh answers that question, how the days of Elul are Yimei Achil. So I'll the Likkutei brings down from Sifra Kabbalah from Kovetz Chaim and Rishus Chassidim. And in Elul there's a special Gilui that isn't made in any other month of the year. But the Gilui of Yudah Gimel Misrachim is made in the month of Elul. That's what Alter brings down from Sifra Kabbalah. Fizz Alter has a question. If Yudah Gimel Misrachim are made in the month of Elul, then why Elul Yimei Achil? Why Elul the weekdays and not a Yom Tiv? What's the question? The question is that the Gilui of Yudah Gimel Misrachim are made in special days, like for example Yom Kippur. It's brought down that it's made Yudah Gimel Misrachim, and that's why Yom Kippur is a Yom Tiv. Yom Kippur is a special day. So Mela, why by Elul, if such a Gilui is made, why is it a regular day, not a Yom Tiv? That's the Shiur Alter asking the Likkutei. In order to explain that question, in order to answer that question, Alter brings Mashal the Melech. Alter brings the Mashal of the Melech, the king who goes on his way back to the palace. And when the king goes back to the palace, he passes by the Sodeh. And then when he's in the Sodeh, then Yitzhak Kolanchi Klase, then everyone goes to greet the king. And the king, the Melech, is Marel Kulam Pen Sefer Makabas Kulam Sefer Panim Yafis. He greets everyone with Sefer Panim Yafis, the man Panim Shechis the Kulam. Moshe Melech Basodeh that Alter brings in the Likkutei. How else the special month is the Moshe Melech Basodeh. In Pasuk Halak we focused on the diukim in the Moshe Melech Basodeh. What is the Moshe? What's the technical of the Moshe? How that's connected to the Chiddush of Elul. What exactly the pattern of the Moshe? How the Melech? Why the Melech is coming to the Sodeh and why the Yidra in the Sodeh. Today we're going to focus on how does the Moshe answer the question. Now today we had the question. The question was why Elul Yimei Achil. Now today because the Moshe Melech Basodeh. How does the Moshe answer the Nimshal? Alter doesn't even trace the Nimshal. Alter just says this in the Moshe and then goes right there. So the Moshe is coming to answer the question. How does it answer the question of why Elul Yimei Achil and not another Yom Tiv? So here are two different sichos that answer this question. The first one is a sicha from Chilik. It's itself a Chilik Daled. It's on page 131 of the Kovetz. The Rebbe starts explaining exactly what a Yom Tiv is and what a Yimei Achil. In order to understand exactly what the Moshe Melech Basodeh comes to explain of Yom Tiv, why Elul Yimei Achil, we first have to understand exactly what is a Yom Tiv. And why should Elul be a Yom Tiv? So the explanation is, everything that happens lamata is all a titzah of things that happen lamayla. That everything that everything that happens in the Begashmis is things are hishtalshus of things that happen in Beruchnis. Or maybe that which you have a Yom Tiv down here, that which Begashmis, the Eibush created a time which is a special time. Say whether it's a Yom Kippur or any other time of the year. The reason why it's a special time isn't because that time is special. It's because Mamayla there's a certain gil which is made on that day. And because Mamayla is a gil that's made on that day, so there is nishtalshal on the Zman, which Zman is also a nivra. The concept of time is also a creation. It's nishtalshal that in the creation of time, that should be a special time. Shabbos is a special time. It says Shabbos Kadmon Leilam, so even before the Eibush created the world, and the Eibush to rest on Yom HaShvi, the concept of Shabbos is already a special day. Because Mamayla, the concept of Shabbos is a special gilui. So every single thing that happens lamata is the titzah what happens lamayla. So that which is a Yom Tiv, Begashmis, is because there's a Yom Tiv Beruchnis, which means that there's a gilui lamayla which is made on that day, which because that makes the time a special time, and that time becomes special. Now, since the Yom Tiv is a titzah of the gilui lamayla, since the Yom Tiv Begashmis that we have a Yom Tiv, we have Pesach, Shavuos, whatever it is a titzah of the gilui lamayla. So what's the focus of it? The focus isn't on that it's a special day and we eat meat and have wine because it's a Yom Tiv. The focus on the gilui. Vasfara gilui, what gilui is made on that day. And based on the gilui, it depends on what the Yom Tiv is. Every Yom Tiv is their gilui. Every Yom Tiv is their ha'ara which is made on that Yom Tiv. And Chassidus explains what each Yom Tiv has the gilui that's made on that Yom Tiv. And based on the gilui, that's how the Yom Tiv looks like. So in order to connect to this gilui, since the gilui is being made in Mamayla, the gilui is being made in Mamayla, something which is higher than Vel. So in order to connect for Nivroin, which Nivram are Ba'etzim, things which don't have a shaykhis to something which a gilui which is higher than Mitzvahs. Nivram don't have a shaykhis to something which is higher than their Dorim, Osmanamak. In order for a Nivra to connect to that gilui, the Nivra has to go out of that bond for the Nivra. He has to stop being stop having that balance of nivra for a certain amount of time. Then he's able to connect to that gilui, which that expresses something in Israel says malach. The reason why we become the malach on Yom Tov is because Yom Tov is a special gilui. In order to connect to that gilui, malacha, which shows on Elam Hazeh, malacha, which shows on the Gdor Elam Hazeh, that is a kavyocha stira to that gilui. In order to connect to that, in order to connect to the gilui, you have to go out of your Gdorim of Hagbalas, your Gdorim of a Nivra, and connect to a gilui which is higher than the mitzvahs. Just like in the mashal of a Melech and Am, that when someone comes to the palace, when someone comes to greet the king, he can't just come the way he is, here it is. Because since he's connecting to something higher than his mitzvahs, which a Melech is Mishich Malamayla, so therefore, in order to connect to this concept of Shich Malamayla, he himself has to go out of his agbalas, which means he has to go out of his regular day-to-day clothes, and he has to wear a nice suit. He has to go out of his gdarim al sa'am and start coming close to or being be'erach to the gilui that he's reaching. And that's the concept of Yom Tov. Yom Tov means that when the gilui is made in Vel, and nivroim, in order to connect to the gilui, have to separate themselves from Vel for in a certain aspect and connect to the gilui. That's the concept of Yom Tov. Melech, that's our Rebbe's question: why Elul is Yemei Achel? Why Elul are Yemei Achel? If there's a gilui, you can Sarachamim. When it comes to Yom Kippur, it's Mir Azar Gilui. We know what happens in Yom Kippur. That Yom Kippur is Shabbos. Yom Kippur is also Basis Malach, and Yom Kippur is also to do anything that's to do with Veld because of the gilui that's made in Yom Kippur. So Melech, why when it comes Elul, when it says in Kabbalah, the same gilui is made is Shashto. When it comes in Elul, the same gilui is made is Yemei Achel. That's the aim of the question. And the answer to that question is, how does the Mashal Melech Basodeh answer the question? So the Rebbe says the Mashal Melech Basodeh is the Rebbe is trying to explain that the gilui in Elul is different than the gilui that's made in the rest of the year, even on the holiest days of the year of Yom Kippur, etc. The gilui of Elul mitzad echad is Yud Gimel Sarachim. It's take the highest gilui. Mitzad sheni, it's a different. The way the gilui in this gal is in different eifim. Normally, the way the gilui in this gal is that it's higher than nivroim, it's higher than nivroim, and it breaks the gdor of nivroim. In order for nivroim to connect to that, it breaks the gdor of nivroim. That the nivroim have to go out of their limitations and connect to that gilui. Have to stop doing malacha and have to start connecting to the gilui. The reason why they're coming is to get Yid to do tshuva. The reason why they're coming is that a Yid who doesn't have a shaykh delakus, who their violence in the Sadeh, which means that he's not holding be'ir, he's not holding in connecting the Eibishter on a high level. He's in Sadeh, he's doing Avedas. He's in weekday, in Yemei Achel. And we have to get that Yid to start doing tshuva. And how does the Eibishter do that? Through the Gidder of Yiddim Sarachim. The Yiddim Sarachim are there to make the Yid to do tshuva. So the Yiddim Sarachim that happen in Elul are different than they happen the rest of any other special time of the year. The way they happen in Elul is that it's coming to the Yid's level the way the Yid is. And therefore, it's mitzad achel it's taka the hechs the gilui of Yiddim Sarachim. Mitzad sheni, it's made in the Velt, in the Yemei Achel of a Yid, in the Sadeh. And that's why the Torah gives the Mashal, Melech Basodeh, which the Mashal is coming to explain, that mitzad achel you have a Melech. And the Melech is taka Mrum Miyam, and the Melech is taka hechel higher than Anshe Asodeh. Mitzad sheni, where's the Melech Nizgala? The Melech Nizgala dafka it comes dafka to the Sadeh. It connects to Anshe Asodeh, to be made that they should have a connection to the Melech. So the kid said the question was why it's Yemei Achel. The Maila, it's not Yemei Achel. The Maila, it's a special time. So therefore the Mata is supposed to be a special time. And the answer is that even with Maila, the way the Gilui in this Gala, this Gilui is different. This Gilui is in a Mashal Melech Basodeh. It's a Mashal that the Gilui is coming to Nivram on their level, and that doesn't apply any other time of the year. It's only Elul. So it's Elul is mitzad achel, it's the time of the year. Mitzad sheni is tafki Yemei Achel. So that is Bekitzer, how the Mashal answers the Nimshal. The Torah doesn't tie trust the Nimshal. The Torah just says the Mashal and expects us to figure out what the Nimshal is. But that's how the Mashal explains the Nimshal, that why Elul Yemei Achel. So that is the first thing. Now Be'emek Yeser, this explanation only touches on one prat of the question of why Elul Yemei Achel. If you touch the Yemei Achel means weekday, as opposed to Yom Tov, which means a day that you don't do Malacha. Saying you answer why Elul Yemei Achel. that Elul is a time that the Malach is in a state of that Gilin. But the case of the concept of the Muslim of Yom Tov, that which Yom Tov is designated is different than Yimei Achel on a weekday, isn't only in the prat that on Yom Tov you can do Malach as opposed to on a weekday you could. There's other differences on Yom Tov that differentiate Yom Tov from a regular weekday, and that is the concept of Simcha. The concept of Simcha, the Torah is a mitzvah, is a mitzvah to v'samachta b'chagecha, and the concept of Meidim is Simcha, that a person is commanded to have Simcha, to have joy on Yom Tov. And the reason why a person is commanded to have joy on Yom Tov is because the mitzvah, the Gilum Ma'il is mantra that you should have Simcha. So mainly you tell me that the reason why Elul Yimei Achel is because the Gilum comes to Yidden, Vuzei where they are, and therefore Malach is in a state to it, that's fine. So you can understand why it's Yimei Achel. But the other prat of Yom Tov, the Yom Tov is a Simcha, Yom Tov is a special day because it's a joyous day. L'chein in Elul, it should also have the concept of Simcha, and Hadrab. In Elul, the Simcha should be expressed even more than regular Yom Tov. Because in Elul, it says that the king is mad upon him, that the Eibishter himself is besimcha gavayach to Yidden, so therefore, kamayim upon Yidden, there should be a tzivah and Simcha. So that which Elul is Yimei Achel, that you can do Malacha, we explain, because the Gil is able to come down even when you do Malacha. But the concept of Simcha, in other words, the Chiv of the king in Yom Tov, that Yom Tov is a Yom Simcha, that shall at least stay. That shall at least stay by Yimei Elul, that Yimei Elul should be Yimei Achel, but there should be a tzivah of Simcha. So the Alter Rebbe asked in the Kovetz when that Elul Yimei Achel, the Alter Rebbe wasn't only asking why we could do Malacha on Chodesh Elul. The Alter Rebbe was asking why it's not a Yom Tov. And Yom Tov includes in it two Nekud, Sai, that you can do Malacha, and Sai, then you Simcha. So Mele, that which you could do Malacha in the Chodesh Elul, the Alter Rebbe answered to Melech Basodeh. But why Elul aren't Yimei Simcha, why Elul aren't joyous days, that the Moshe Melech Basodeh doesn't answer that. Adrab. Inside the Moshe Melech Basodeh, you should have seen, there should for sure be Simcha. That aspect of Yom Tov, there should for sure be Simcha in Chodesh Elul. But why don't we find the union of Simcha by Elul? That's the Rebbe Shayim. So the Rebbe starts explaining this, the Sichos from Sheftin Tashon Amches. It's one of the says the Gezichis in Bechlal, in the Aveda V'Yid. And the Frat in the concept of Melech Basodeh, it's one of the says the Gezichis of where the Rebbe really explained the concept of Melech Basodeh and touched it into Pashta Ishes in Yid Aveda. So the explanation is, speak of it from Sif Gimel, the explanation is that Elul is Achana to the rest of the year. Since it's Achana to the rest of the year, in order to understand the Techn of Chodesh Elul, we have to understand the concept of Achana in Torah, the way Torah is Magdir, the way the Torah defines preparation. And if you look in Torah, when you want to see a definition of preparation, so we see that Torah doesn't give a tzivui on preparation. The mitzvah of chinuch, preparing a child to do Torah mitzvahs. When a yid turns 13 years old, he becomes 100% mechuyev in Torah mitzvahs, mitzvahs, averis. And any mitzvah he does, he's now mechuyev. And any aver he does, he get einish. Now, any concept of a person starting something new has to have preparation before. Any new musik has to have a preparation before. So obviously, a child, when he starts doing Torah mitzvahs, when he's bar mitzvah, when he becomes bar mitzvah, it can't be something that he starts doing on day one because he's already mechuyev. It must be that you have to mechanech him before to do Torah mitzvahs. That's what the concept of chinuch comes from. Mechanech is one of the Yisaidus of Yiddishkeit is the concept of chinuch. Mechanech a child, so when he gets the bar mitzvahs, that he's able to do Torah mitzvahs, and now he's doing Sai mitzvah same, it's Sai mitzvah leisas. And apparently we don't find that Torah is mitzvah a yid, a gadol, to mechanech a child to do Torah mitzvahs. So how can Torah not give a chiyuv of such a Yisaidus thing, which is negate to every single yid and all mitzvahs that he's going to do after his bar mitzvah? So you could say that the reason why Torah is mitzvah and chinuch, the reason why Torah doesn't give a mitzvah for chinuch, because the concept of chinuch is only in preparation. The concept of chinuch is that you have to prepare a child, so when he gets bar mitzvah, he's able to do the chiyuv on himself. But when it comes to preparation, Torah doesn't give a chiyuv on preparations. For example, the concept of machshira mitzvah, that which you have to prepare, let's say a knife for bismillah, or a knife for shchita, or prepare parchment for sefer Torah. Torah doesn't say that there's a mitzvah to prepare a knife for bismillah, or prepare a knife for shchita. Because Torah says the shech. Torah says that bismillah, in order to do that, you have to find the ways to do it. So in the it's a special inyan. machshir mitzvah takadei Shabbos in some instances. But Torah doesn't give a chiyuv on such a thing because it's something which is understandable by itself. The fact that Torah said that there's a nifl, something has to be done. In order that this concept should be done, that's the preparation before. So Torah has to give a tzivah that you should also do the preparation to do the mitzvah. The main thing is the mitzvah. The preparation is that what happens in order for this concept to happen, you need to have something done before. So Torah didn't give a tzivah on that preparation because that preparation has to be done. But that preparation doesn't have the chshivas with the atzmei. It's all a preparation for something else. And since it's obvious that you have to make the preparation, so Torah doesn't give the tzivah on that thing. For example, Torah says, but you have to have avos Hashem. Avos Hashem lekecha, and also the concept of avos Hashem kamecha. And the famous Shai Lechsin is asked, Be'ech Shai Tzivah Ava, how can you have a tzivah in Ava? How can you love something which isn't you? And the regular explanation is that the mitzvah is taket for avos Hashem. But in order to have avos Hashem, you have to have his benus before, on side when the Likkutei is, or when you get to avos Yisrael, side when you get to the Yiddish. So in order to have the mitzvah, avos Shabalev, in order to have a mitzvah which an emotional connection to side the Eibush and side of the Yid, Kamuvan that has to go through a process that a person thinks about it, and it goes to a person's seichel, and then the seichel is able to be made in midas. And the mitzvah is the outcome of his benus, that is Shav Avos Hashem. So Torah, basically, when Torah says Shav Avos Hashem, that includes side his benus before, and then a person should that had this in seichel, and therefore is able to come to a regesh, is able to come to a feeling of Avos Hashem. Without this, it's not possible. So therefore, it's obvious that you're going to have to do such a thing. So the same thing like chinuch. You can say b'atzem that chinuch, that was to educate a child, it's moving ma'atzmei. It's obvious that just like everything in this world needs preparation. And so when a child hits 13, so it's moving ma'atzmei that he's not going to be able to do Torah mitzvah by himself. So it's common sense that you have to do it before. And Torah doesn't give a tzivui of things should move ma'atzmei. So this answer isn't a good answer. Why? Because there's a big difference between chinuch and machshir mitzvah. There's a big difference between the concept of a preparation for a mitzvah, or the necessities for a mitzvah, and the concept of chinuch. When the Eibush says to do a mitzvah, it's avos Hashem, or yeshivas basukah, or putting on tefillin, all these things are mitzvahs, are chafta that has to exist. So the preparations that chafta, the preparations to that item, sai sukkah, sai tefillin, or sai the avos Hashem that you're supposed to have, it's not negea, you have to do it in a certain way, those things are negea pe'alacha. But that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah isn't that the tzibur has to do that. When you do those things, you're not doing a mitzvah. You're doing a preparation of a mitzvah. The Ratzon HaBe'er isn't in that preparation. The Ratzon of the Eibush is to have tefillin that look in a certain way. In order to have tefillin to look in a certain way, you have to have sai, klaf, and sai, batim, v'chol. So the machshir mitzvah is the reason why the Torah doesn't mention them, not only because they're obvious, but it's something which isn't teifas makim. It's something which doesn't have a entity by itself. It's only a preparation for something else. At the post, when it comes to chinuch isn't only a preparation for when a katan becomes a gadol, so therefore he's going to know what to do. Because if chinuch was only preparation for something that when he gets older, the mitzvah that he does when he's a katan wouldn't have any gather al pi halacha. The mitzvah he does when he's a katan wouldn't have any legitimacy al pi halacha. In Peril we see that when children learn Torah, they do mitzvahs and biko when they learn Torah, so their Torah, hevel tineka shabisam, their Torah al pi halacha is has a gather of Torah. And not only al pi halacha is a gather of Torah, but in certain pratim it's even higher than adult learning Torah. So if chinuch is only a prat, and when he gets older, it's only a preparation, so you can't say the preparation should be more than the object, the goal that he's trying to accomplish. So the tafel can be bigger than the ikr. Even though it's a angle lekachtav as a whole arichis, tafel ki ikr. Sometimes in Torah we do find that the tafel is more than the ikr. If Torah wanted that when a child is 13 years old, that's when the mitzvah counts, and anything until that is a preparation, and that's why Torah didn't mention the concept of chinuch, then the chinuch or the mitzvah that a katan does when he's a katan, it wouldn't have any gather up halach. It wouldn't have an inyan. He wouldn't be accomplishing anything when he's doing that mitzvah. He's only preparing for something bigger. And with we find that chinuch is only a hechsher mitzvah, but when a katan learns Torah, and a katan does a mitzvah, that mitzvah is no chiyuv in Echram, is no chiyuv, and you can't tell a katan what to do. But that mitzvah does have a gather up halach of a mitzvah, and therefore there should at least be a chiyuv on the g'daylim. There should be a chiyuv on an adult to prepare a child to mechanech the child in the mitzvah, because the mitzvah the child does has a gedar halach of a mitzvah. Why doesn't the Torah mention the concept of chinuch? That's the shayla. So the answer is that the reason why the Torah mentions chinuch isn't because of the chisaron in chinuch, like I mentioned in isn't because chinuch is only preparation, but fakert. Chinuch is higher than a regular mitzvah. And since it's higher than the gedar of tzivum, since it's higher than the gedar of a commandment, therefore it's not under the gun of commandments, it's not one of the 613 mitzvahs that the Eibishter gave you. How's chinuch higher than a mitzvah? How can chinuch be higher than a mitzvah? So in order to understand that, we have to understand what a mitzvah is. The concept of mitzvah is a tzivui, means a commandment, which means that there's a mitzvah and a mitzvah. It means that there's a commander who wants to get something done. In order to get that concept done, he's commanding someone to do that concept. So there has to be a link between the mitzvah and the mitzvah. Because if there's no link between the mitzvah and the mitzvah, if there's no link between the commander and the person who is commanding, I mean, in other words, if they have no connection to each other, so if they have no connection to each other, there's no reason why the person who is commanding would listen to the commander. In order for the person who's doing the commandment to listen to the commander, there has to be some sort of link between the commander and the person who's commanding and the person who's getting the command. What is the link between them? The link between them is the Kabbalah Malchus, the acceptance of the authority that the Am, or the person who's getting commanded, he accepted that he's going to have an authority from this person who's commanding him to do. Now this person is going to be a man Omar that's going to be able to command him and tell him what to do. Without that, then there's no link, there's no authority one over the other. There could be a concept of shlita. There could be a concept of a shaylet, that he forces, a dictator, that he forces the Am, but that's not a concept of mitzvah and mitzvah. It's not a commandment. The real concept of a commander commanding something means that there's a link, there's a true kasher between the commander and the person who's being commanded. And the mitzvah is not only a tzivui, a mitzvah is lashon tzavta, there's a connection. And in order to be a connection, there has to be someone who forms the connection. Who forms the connection? So the person who's getting commanded has to come from him. If it comes from Ma'il, if it comes from the mitzvah, the person who's commanding, so then it doesn't have to do with the person who's getting commanded. It doesn't have to do with his ratzon. It doesn't have to do with his will. In order for that to be the connection, to be a real connection, it has to come from the person who's getting commanded. It has to come from the Am. In other words, in order for a king to be a legitimate king, he has to be crowned by the people. If he's crowned by the people, then he's a legitimate king. If he decided to be king and he's going to force his kingship onto the people, so then the kingdom is inside himself. But there's no link between him and the people. They're not his people. He forced himself onto them. But if the people accept his authority over them, that they accepted the ratzon, so that's a real king. That's a real kingdom. That's a real kingship, that he is the melech on them. So there's two concepts of it. You have the practical connection between the king and the Am. The practical connection between the mitzvah and the mitzvah is that one person listens to another. That whatever you tell me to do, I'm doing. You have the connection of the actual tzivui, the commandment that is given, being transmitted. The king wants something to be done, so he tells the Am to do something. And then you have, even before that, before any of that to happen, you have what formed the connection that there could be a mitzvah. What formed the connection that there could be a mitzvah to begin with. What formed the connection? The Am accepted themselves as they're going to be the Am, they're going to be under the authority of this king. Now obviously, if you're going to tell the Am, if you're going to tell the people that they have to accept the king as a king, if the king's going to say, I'm putting out a commandment, and everyone has to accept me as king, then that defeats the purpose of the Am accepting the king as king. The whole concept is that the Am accepted the king as king on their initiative. When they accepted on their initiative, then the king could feel as an emissary king over the Am. But to say that there's a mitzvah, to say there's a commandment that you have to accept me as king, that's a tie to the sasti. Because the concept of a commandment comes after the Am accepted the king as their authority. After he's their authority, whatever the authoritarian or whatever the king is going to give, then he's going to accept. We're going to accept whatever he says, and whatever he says, we're going to do. So Kabbalah Shemaim is higher than mitzvahs, is precedent to mitzvahs. In order for mitzvahs to exist, in order for the Am or the Yidden to listen to the Eibishter, there first has to be a concept of Kabbalah Shemaim. There has to be a concept that the Yidden accept the Eibishter as king, and whatever the Eibishter is going to command, they're going to listen to him. Why? Because the Eibishter is the Melech. If the Eibishter wasn't the Melech, if Yidden never accepted the Eibishter, the El Malch Shamayim or El Mitzvahs, so then there's no reason for Yidden to listen to the Eibishter on their own care. They can be forced to, but it's not coming from them. So these are the two concepts of doing mitzvahs with Pel, and then you have a higher concept of Kabbalah Seh Malch Shamayim, being makabel the authority of the Eibishter. And this is a concept of both in Chassidus, and it's both in Kabbalah Malchus V'Achar Kabbalah Gzeirosai. It's both in Medrash. So this is the concept of both in Chassidus Kabbalah K'pam. Over here, the Rebbe goes a step further, a level higher. What causes? Why would the Am accept the king as a king? Why would the Am, or in our context, why would the Yidden accept the authority of the Eibishter? What makes Yidden that they should accept the authority of the Eibishter? That whatever the Eibishter says, they're going to do. Where does this Kabbalah come from? Where's the shortage of this Kabbalah? So Pashtos, it's a decision Yid made. Yid makes a decision for whatever reason it is that he's going to accept whatever the Eibishter tells him. But here the Rebbe goes a step further and says that whole Gufa, that which Yidden Bechlal accept the authority of the Eibishter, isn't because it's a decision that they made that it's Len Tzachayz that they should accept the authority of the Eibishter. It's not something which is Api Tamadas. It's not something which is even the man Tamadas. It comes from the Teva of a Yid. That the Etzem a Yid was created with his nature. That a Yid's nature is to give himself over to the Eibishter. A Yid was born as an Eved of the Eibishter. A Yid was born with a Tnuah that a Yid is a Kabbalah Son. A Yid was born with a Tnuah that he wants to give himself over to the Eibishter. That is the definition of a Yid. The definition of a Yid is that he has a Chelik Elikai Ma'amamish. And that Chelik Elikai is Sai Bonim and Sai Bonim. So a Yid is a Tnuah of Ibigam Ketz of the Eibishter to give himself over to the authority of the Eibishter. So that which a Yid accepts the authority of the Eibishter, that's only bringing out what his nature really is. It's not something which is coming from the outside. The Kabbalah's El Malchus Shamayim is coming from who he really is. He's not accepting a foreign, he's not accepting a Davar Zor, a Melech which is separated from him. He's accepting a Melech which is better connected to him right now. Elamai. There has to be an official acceptance to bring that out Begili. And the next step is he has to listen to what the Eibishter says, that should affect his day-to-day life. So that's in the speech Shlem over here. When we say that the Eibishter tells the Yid what to do a mitzvah, to put on tefillin, or keep Shabbos, that's the lowest level, if you could say. That's the lowest connection to the Yid and the Eibishter. It's the Makabah passage of the connection to the Yid and the Eibishter. That the Yid does what the Eibishter wants. But before that comes two levels which are much different than that. The first level is that the Yid accepts himself, Kabbalah Malch Shamayim, Yid accepts himself, that he's going to take the Eibishter as an authority. And even higher than that, the reason why he accepts the Eibishter as authority because that's him connected to the Eibishter. So that which Yid has Kabbalah Soul isn't against his mitzvahs, isn't something which in order to be bottled, he has to break his mitzvahs. That is who he is. Yid is a Kabbalah Soul. And when he does that, when he does what the Eibishter wants, he's not going against his teva. He's doing what his teva really is. And a lot of letters the Rebbe writes how the concept of that which a Yid does, mitzvahs, isn't something which is oil, isn't something which is against his nature. A Yid Ba'atzem is a Ben Chayr when he does mitzvahs, because that is who he is. A Yid is a Kabbalah Zon. And therefore, when he is Makabal Malch Shamayim, the shayrish of that is, that what was lit in them is, that he is Ba'atzem connected to the Eibishter. So through this we can explain why Chinuch is in a mitzvah. The concept of Chinuch is a Yid doing a mitzvah, a child doing a mitzvah, even though there's no reason for him to do a mitzvah. He's not mitzvah on the mitzvah. His mitzvah doesn't have mitzvah. His mitzvah is tevis malkum. His mitzvah is significant. Mitzvah chain, he wasn't commanded to do the mitzvah, which means that the reason why he's doing his mitzvah because that's his nature. As that's what he wants to do, not because he was commanded to do, but because that's what his nature is. And even the pashtos anyonim, even if you say chinuch is to regulate the child to do Torah mitzvahs, the concept is that the person should be regular in Torah mitzvahs. The person should be fluent in Torah mitzvahs. This fluency comes from it comes from doing Torah mitzvahs, b'pashtos. But what's behind that is that a Yid is connected to the Eibishter B'etzem, and therefore he does Torah mitzvahs. So it's true that when he grows up, he becomes commanded in Torah mitzvahs, and he becomes commanded to do what the Eibishter wants. And that's all mitzvah, the way the Eibishter is commanding him as a separate entity. But as a child, when you mechanech a child to do a mitzvah, his mitzvah is the highest type of mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that isn't commanded as a separate entity, he's doing mitzvah because that's him connected to the Likkutei. And that's his nature. His nature is and that's why chinuch is a mitzvah, because it's hard. A mitzvah means that you have a separate mitzvahs and you tell them that separate mitzvahs what to do. Here we're talking about a yid that's him connected to the Eibishter, which is higher than a mitzvah, and therefore it can't be under the gedarim of a tzivui of a mitzvah and a mitzvah. Now these three levels, sai chinuch, which you mentioned before, sai kabbalah samach shamayim, and sai do mitzvah b'pel, express themselves in 3 times of a year, but we focus on 3 different concepts. These 3 different concepts. Throughout the year, we're focusing on the lowest level of kiyum Torah mitzvah b'pel. Kiyum Torah mitzvah b'pel, when a yid does the Pesach, Shiur, Sukkot, a person puts on tefillin every single day. He says Kriyashma. That's all he's doing things what the Eibishter commanded him to do after he accepted the Eibishter's authority. So therefore, he does these mitzvahs throughout the whole year based on that Kabbalah that he already accepted. You have a practice, you have this every single day during Shema. But b'chlalos, when does a person accept the Eibishter's authority? A person accepts the Eibishter's authority on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the concept of Kabbalah Malchus. That the Eibishter tells Yidden that they are Mekabel, the Eibishter als Melech on Rosh Hashanah, which means we accept the Eibishter's authority for the rest of the year. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is about. Rosh Hashanah is about accepting the Eibishter's authority. So throughout the year, a person is connected to the Eibishter, and now there's a link between the Mitzvah and the Mitzvah. There's a link that the Eibishter is, we accept the Eibishter as king from our initiative, from our Mitzvahs. We blew shofar. And therefore, throughout the year, we're able to do mitzvahs which are fulfilling the ratzon of the Melech, which we accepted as a Melech. But even before Rosh Hashanah, like we said before, in order to have Kabbalah Malchus, in order to have a erech, in order to have a connection to the Melech, why should we want to have the Melech? Why should the Melech want to have us? There has to be some sort of link between the Melech and the Am. Like it says in Tanya that if a person can be a Melech on Eitzim Avon, in order to be a king, to have authority, there has to be some sort of erech between the Melech and the Am. So Mitzvah Chataka Am is Lashon Ememes. Am means that they're lower than the king. Am means that they're separated. Mitzvah Sheni, it has to be some sort of link between the Am and the Melech. Why should the Am be Mekabel, the Malchus and the Melech? And in order for that to happen, means that they have to be Betzim connected. And that is what we focus on Elul. What we focus on Elul is that he is Betzim connected to the Eibishter. Not that the Eibishter is a Melech, not that he's doing what the Eibishter wants, that the Eibishter is connected to the Teva of Yid. The Teva of Yid is connected to the Eibishter. And that is expressed that is the Avodah of Elul. The Avodah of Elul is bringing out this Nekudah. The Avodah of Elul is bringing us in the Nekudah, the discussions of atoms of a Yid to the Eibishter, that they're not 2 separate things, they're one mitzvah. That Yisrael b'kutshurich kol echad. And that's why the Avodah of Elul's marum is in the union of Ani with Deidi. You want to mechaber the Ani, the person, with Deidi to Megala, that the Ani Batzim is connected with Deidi. And that's why we find that all the minhagim of Elul, there's no mitzvahs in Elul. There's no mitzvahs, there's no commandments in Elul. Elul is not a time of commandments. What we do have in Elul is minhagim. Meaning of blowing shofar and meaning of saying Lav Hashem Eiri. All these are minhagim. Minhagim means it comes from Yidin himself. It comes from the tacht in himself, connecting to the Eibishter, because that is who his Teva is. Now, where do we see that in a Yid's day-to-day Haveda? That a Yid's Teva Betzim connected to the Eibishter. So regarding Torah mitzvahs, we just said now is ready when there's a commander commanding to someone that the Eibishter wants a certain thing to be done. But that thing to be done is a very specific thing. The Eibishter wants there to be a concept of tefillin in the world. And that tefillin should be put on by Yid. So that's a pratistic aver of a Yid. The arm should put on the concept, the chefts of tefillin, which is a pratistic chefts in the world. And every single mitzvah has to do with a specific object connected to a specific part of a Yid. Because that's what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is, there's a mitzvah of a Yid, and there's a specific thing that the Eibishter wants that a Yid should do. Where's the concept that a Yid's teva, Yid's nature is connected to the Eibishter? Not only that a Yid does what the Eibishter wants, but Yid is connected to the Eibishter. That's expressed in the Aveda of that which a Yid does connects to the Eibishter, not in a tzir of Kedusha, not in a tzir of mitzvahs, not in a tzir of Torah. He connects to the Eibishter in his day-to-day life, side when he sleeps, and side when he eats, and side when he does business. That which is recognized as a Yid, that expresses itself, that his connection to the Eibishter isn't limited to certain nuas that he does, or certain tzivuyin that are limited tzivuyin that the Eibishter gave him. He's connected to the Eibishter because Ani Leveis Hashem Sheskeni, that his whole being, he feels Ani Leveis Hashem Sheskeni. When he is able to be connected to the Eibishter in things which aren't Begali asked from him to do, then you could say that that's his nature. Just like a person, his nature is to sleep, and his nature is to eat, and that's what he feels his nature is. When he does those things for the Eibishter, it means his natural life, his natural day-to-day life, his natural being, his natural teva, that is connected to the Eibishter. And that's why we focus on Chedesh Elul. In order to have Rosh Hashanah, in order to have the rest of the year, you first have to have the chinuch, or the achon of Chedesh Elul. This connection of the Yid's teva being connected to the Eibishter, that happens in Elul. And that's the Moshe Melech Basodeh. Melech Basodeh means that the Eibishter comes to the Yimei Achel, the side weekdays, and the Eibishter comes to the Sad, which is also Shol Zechel. It means that the Yid connected to the Eibishter in his day-to-day Yimei Achel life. In a connection to the Eibishter, which isn't expressed in Torah mitzvahs specifically, it's expressed dafke in a Yid not going out of his day-to-day life. It's not a Yom Tov, which a Yid is going out of his garden, out of his mundane life. That is the mitzvahs of the Yid. That's who he is on a regular day. That he's connected to the Likkutei. So the things that we can understand why Elul aren't Yemei Simcha. The second you say that the Eibishter commands us to have Simcha and Elul, just like any other Yom Tov, it means that the Simcha will be limited to this specific tzivah. If you say that the Eibishter, just like on Sukkot, the Eibishter said V'samachta b'chagecha, which means that there's a certain gilu which has to do with Simcha. So the Simcha is mugbal lefi that gilu. The Simcha is mugbal to how big that gilu is. Because if the Simcha is coming from a mitzvah, a tzivui, if the Simcha is coming from a commander who wants a ufdo of Simcha, a commander who wants something, a concept of Simcha to be happening, it's mugbal according to that gilu or that tzivui which is given. Shaking the Simcha of Elul, the Simcha which is higher than the Dvar. It's a Simcha which is higher than the concept, any concept of a Yid being a seven mitzvahs, and the Eibishter telling the Yid what to do in a specific prat. It's a concept where the Yid is celebrating or is rejoicing how his etzem, his being, his teva is connected to the Eibishter. Yismach havai b'maisav. The concept of a Yid connected to the Eibishter not because of something he does, not because of any darga that he's reaching around, not because of a tzivui that the Eibishter told him what to do, but because of what a Yid is. And that's what the tzivui of Simcha, because the second you say the tzivui of Simcha means that there's a mitzvah and a mitzvah. It means that there's number one, the connection that we have to the Eibishter is formed by something, and not by who we are. It's formed by the mitzvah, and therefore it's mugbal according to the gdarim of the mitzvah, or more beruchins is mugbal if the earth that's made, and because of that we have to be b'simcha. But here the simcha is not because of earth that's made. It's not because of anything that's no tzivui. It's because of what a yid betzim is, and that's why there's no tzivui and simcha, because that's to come from the yid himself. And after a person has done a Chedesh Elul, and that's the Yisayit for the Aveda of Kovetz and Resources, and then a person has Kovetz and Resources and Rosh Hashanah, and he's become with the Eibishter as an authority, then throughout the year a person can do Torah mitzvahs and be mamshech, the Kovetz and Resources throughout the rest of the year, into every single day, every day of the year, in the mitzvahs that he does, because of all I'm talking that came from Chedesh Elul.